Today's ICD-10 procedure coding case study focuses on how to code a spinal fusion using ICD-10-PCS. I will explain which key pieces of information are needed when coding a spinal fusion and take you through an operative report breaking down the procedure step by step. My name is Claire and I'm an inpatient coding auditor. In my coding tips and tricks videos, you'll discover valuable insights to help sharpen your medical coding skills and code with confidence. If that sounds like something that would be helpful to you, please consider hitting that subscribe button so that you can be notified whenever I release new content. In ICD-10-PCS, spinal fusions are classified under the root operation fusion, which is defined as joining together portions of an articular body part, rendering the articular body part immobile. The main goal of a spinal fusion is to join together two or more vertebrae of the spine, allowing them to heal into a single solid bone. This procedure is done to stop painful motion or restore stability to the spine. According to the ICD-10-PCS guidelines, a spinal fusion requires the use of a bone graft or bone graft substitute to make the joint immobile. This means that the operative report must describe the use of bone graft or a bone graft substitute to code the procedure to root operation fusion. It's important to note that this guideline is specific to spinal fusion and does not apply to fusion of other joints. When you're coding a spinal fusion, there are a few key pieces of information you'll need to gather from the operative report. First, you need to determine which level of the spine was fused and how many vertebral joints were involved. Additionally, you'll need to determine whether the fusion was done on the anterior column, which is at the front of the body, or the posterior column, which is at the back of the body. If both the anterior and posterior columns were fused, it's important to report the ICD-10-PCS codes for both procedures. You'll also want to determine the technique used to access the portion of the spine being fused, whether it was an anterior approach from the front or a posterior approach from the back. And finally, you will need to determine the type of bone graft utilized and any additional procedures performed, such as a discectomy or decompression. Let's begin by reviewing the operative report and gathering the necessary information. Reviewing the title of the report and the reason for the procedure, we see that the procedure is a cervical arthrodesis, which is another word for fusion. It was involving levels C3 through C7. It's important to understand that a level consists of two vertebrae and the inner space that contains the disc. In the ICD-10-PCS coding system, a vertebral joint is defined as two adjacent vertebrae separated by an inner space. So when determining the number of levels, we need to count the number of vertebral joints between each level rather than counting each level individually. This means that C3 through C4 is one joint, C4 through C5 is a second joint, C5 through C6 is a third joint, and C6 through C7 is a fourth, making a total of 4 levels for our fusion. Additionally, since the op report indicates that the procedure was done to treat spinal stenosis with myelopathy, which is a term that means spinal cord compression, we should be on the lookout for any indications of a spinal cord decompression being done as an additional procedure. The root operation release is coded separately from the spinal fusion when decompression is documented as a distinct surgical objective, such as relieving pressure from the spinal cord. Moving on to the description of the procedure, we see that the patient was brought to the operating room and prepared for the procedure. The patient was then rotated into the prone position. This particular positioning is significant because it tells us about the approach used to access the specific area of the spine that requires fusion, which we will need to know when selecting our qualifier. The spine can be accessed through either an anterior approach, which involves entering through the front of the body with the patient lying supine or face up, or the spine can be approached through a posterior approach where the entry is made through the back of the body and the patient is positioned prone or face down. In our case, the patient was placed in the prone position, indicating that the posterior approach should be selected when choosing our qualifier. Next, an incision was made in the neck exposing the spinous processes, lamina, and lateral masses of C2 through C7. This indicates that the posterior spine, which refers to the back portion of the spine, will be fused. To determine if the posterior column is the site of the fusion, look for terms such as spinous processes, pedicle, lamina, facet, articular process, and transverse process. Next, the surgeon describes placing screws and decompressing the spine from C2 to C7, completely freeing up the thecal sac. The thecal sac is the outer covering of the spinal cord. Freeing the thecal sac indicates that pressure was taken off of the spinal cord and meets the definition of root operation release, which is defined as freeing a body part from an abnormal physical constraint by cutting or use of force. The cervical spinal cord will be the body part value because that is the structure being released. Following the decompression, the surgeon continued placing hardware and decorticated the facets, which involves removing the outer layer of the bone to prepare for the bone graft. Both the placement of instrumentation and decortication of the facet is integral to the spinal fusion and would not be coded separately. The procedure was completed by packing the facet joints with a combination of local autograft and crushed cancellous allograft bone chips. The wound was then closed and the procedure concluded. This last step confirms the use of a bone graft or a bone graft substitute to immobilize the joint, meeting the PCS definition of a spinal fusion. The description of the bone graft being packed into the facet joints also confirms that this was a fusion of the posterior spine. Additionally, this information allows us to determine the appropriate device character. According to the PCS guidelines, when a mixture of autologous and non-autologous bone graft with or without biological or synthetic extenders or binders is used to immobilize the joint, the procedure should be coded with the device value autologous tissue substitute. Now that we have read the operative report and determined the necessary information, let's build out our PCS codes. We will begin with the spinal fusion procedure. The first character, which represents the section, will be 0. Spinal fusion falls under the medical and surgical section because it is a surgical procedure. Our second character, representing the body system, will be R for upper joints. The upper joints include the cervical vertebral joints. Our third character represents the root operation, which we have determined is fusion, so we will select G for the root operation fusion. Our fourth character represents the specific body part, which in this case is the cervical joint. We have a choice between a single cervical joint and 2 or more cervical joints. As we have determined that 4 cervical joints were fused, we will select 2 for cervical vertebral joints 2 or more. The fifth character represents the surgical approach. Reviewing the operative report, we saw the surgeon made an incision which exposed the cervical spine, meeting the PCS definition for open approach, and so we'll choose 0 for open approach. The sixth character represents the device used in the fusion. The selection of the device character depends on the type of bone graft material used to fuse the joint. In this specific case, we have identified the use of both autograft and allograft, and according to the PCS guidelines, when a combination of autologous and non-autologous bone graft is used to immobilize the joint, the procedure should be coded with the device value autologous tissue substitute. So we'll choose 7 for autologous tissue substitute. The seventh and final character in the code represents the qualifier, which will identify the specific column of the spine being fused, anterior or posterior, and the surgical approach used, the front or the back of the body. In this case, since the fusion was performed through a posterior approach from the back of the body and involved the posterior column of the spine, we will select 1 for posterior approach, posterior column. Now that we have our code for the spinal fusion, we also need to assign a code for the decompression of the spinal cord that was performed in addition to the fusion. The decompression is a surgical procedure, so our first character will be 0. The spinal cord is a part of the central nervous system, so our second character will be 0. Our third character for the root operation will be N for release, because the root operation used to report the decompression is release, which is defined as freeing a body part from an abnormal physical constraint by cutting or use of force. Our fourth character will be W for cervical spinal cord. Our approach was open, the same as the fusion, so 0 for open approach. As for the device and qualifier, which are our last two characters, our only options in this table are Z no device and Z no qualifier. So now we have our final PCS codes. 0RG2071 for fusion 2 to 6 cervical vertebral joints with autologous tissue substitute, posterior approach, posterior column, open approach, and 00NW0ZZ for release cervical spinal cord open approach. So that's it for today's procedure coding case study. I really hope that this video was helpful for you. If it was, please give it a thumbs up, and if there's any procedures that you would like me to cover in the future, just leave a comment below and I'll add them to my list. Thanks for watching, and until next time, happy coding!